Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a very special Monday night here on the channel alongside Mr. Martin Popoff. We had actually planned on doing a live feed tonight, but for some strange reason, Zoom and YouTube are kind of not working so closely together like they used to. And whereas previously, because we've done a lot of live feeds here on the channel, I just basically click on a couple buttons and Zoom takes us right through to YouTube live. Here we are. Now it's asking for granting permissions, and I go into my settings and all the permissions are already granted. So why it's not working, I don't know. I spent a half hour trying to figure it out, and Martin and I just decided, you know what, we're just going to record a quick little video. We'll put it up on YouTube in a little while, and we'll both be sitting there in the chat, and we can talk to you then. So we just can't talk to you live. So
and also, Pete, this is an opportunity to say, hey, tell me in the comments how to fix this.
Yeah, how do you work this damn thing, right? It's just, you know, it doesn't need to be this complicated, and it wasn't before. And what's really crazy, it's like, I mean, I just did like a couple live Q&A shows just like a few weeks ago. So why, you know, why is it so difficult? I don't know. So anyway, we'll figure it out. But something between Zoom and YouTube is just not communicating as easily as it used to, and there's new permissions, and I don't know, whatever. So we'll figure it out, or I'll figure it out, and at a later date we'll try this again. But anyway, Martin and I are here. We figure instead of scrapping the whole thing, let's just record something because it is pretty timely. So here in the States, we had July 4th yesterday. Today is the 5th. Here in the U.S., everybody's enjoying a you know, an extra day to just kind of remember, you know, things, all sorts of historical things about our country, things that are American. You know, Martin, even though he's in Canada, knows a lot about what goes on here in the States and in America. And why not just talk about some great American bands, you know, as a celebration of July 4th, but today's the 5th. So why not talk about 5 great American bands from each of us? So that's what we decided to do. So this is nothing too complicated. We've decided, well, I mean, Martin, maybe you want to talk a little bit about why we decided who we decided rather than our absolute favorites. We really went real Americana here, sort of, I guess.
Yeah, I guess what happened was Pete says, hey, let's talk about 5 great American bands. And I messengered him back and said, why don't we talk about 5 very American bands? And Pete said, expand on that. So I said, well, why don't we come up with some bands and discuss why they are so inherently American? And we started rattling off a bunch of names, and they all kind of had different reasons, you know, slightly different nuances to them. So we're going to talk about why these bands are so absolutely ingrained in the idea of Americana, or the United States of America. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, and of course, there's going to be some that we're not talking about here. Doesn't mean we don't love them. Just maybe these we felt were a little bit more American. I know there's like one of mine that's kind of questionable, sort of, but I don't care because they're from New York, and hey, so am I. So I'll give my little reasons as slim as they might be, but for the most part, I think we picked some really good ones that are inherently American and always have been. So I'll have Martin kick us off with his number 5.
All right. So my number 5 pick was John Mellencamp. You know, Jack and Diane and all that. There's all the stuff with Farm Aid, you know, Midwest guy. And also, you know, my first thought was Bruce Springsteen, but then I thought, well, let's just go a little deeper and let's go one layer down kind of thing. And up here in Canada, we have our own American. His name's Bryan Adams. It's you know, somewhat in the same camp, but definitely, you know, there's the Springsteen camp. I've been threatening for a little while to do an episode of my podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, about the Bruce Springsteen family. And that would have been people like Bruce Springsteen, John Mellencamp, but also Thin Lizzy, Van Morrison, UFO, Dexy's Midnight Runners, maybe Southside Johnny. Who else was I thinking of? Mink DeVille, Willie Nile, even guys like that, right? But this is the second guy you sort of think of, like an well, actually, look at this one. I didn't even plan this. So there's the front cover, there's the back cover. So so there you go. But yeah, I think John Mellencamp is, you know, we all sort of hated the guy in the very beginning because he was just kind of a Bryan Adams, and we were young and all that, and so was he. And then he matured and dropped the cougar, and then became, you know, one of the great singer-songwriters, artists of his generation. Of the post-Springsteen generation. I saw him live once. It was absolutely amazing. I was floored about how good the show was. So I just think he's just inherently one of the great voices of America. And then, like I say, the whole Farm Aid thing too, and the whole Midwest rock thing, deeply treasured American artist. There you go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't get much more American than him, right? So good choice. And that's kind of a similar direction. Well, I don't know about direction, but a lot of the same reasons why I decided to go with Creedence Clearwater Revival, or CCR. To me, one of the great legendary American rock and roll bands. And, we're talking about a time, when they were really big. We're the late 60s into the very early 70s. So not a lot of years. They crammed a bunch of albums into a short span of time, but so many hits. They sang about, the Vietnam War and that bad moon rising and looking out my back door, and places like Lodi and, Born on the Bayou and all that kind of stuff. Real American things. They toured incessantly here. They were always on the road, and they were always on American hit radio. This band sold a ton of records. Their singles were played on the radio, sold a lot of 45s. They were just probably one of the biggest American bands in that time period. If there was no Beatles, could you say that that CCR were one of the biggest bands at the time? Perhaps, right?
Yeah, they were massive.
Yeah.
For sure.
So to me, this is one of the first bands that came to mind. I love them. I think, most people have sort of a soft spot for their, kind of jangly rock and roll, bluesy rock and roll, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess they call it swamp rock back in the day, right? Where that was the name that they had for themselves. I don't know, whatever it is, it's so decidedly Creedence Clearwater Revival. And I always really dug them. And yeah, they're one of the great American bands of all time that I think, most people, like I said, most people have a soft spot for, but you don't hear a lot of people talking about, maybe because it was so long ago, but everybody knows these songs. Everybody knows them.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Well, the other thing, Pete, that I've always thought about that band, this may be wrong or whatever, but it's just always been on my mind, is the idea that they sound like they're literally timeless in that historical way that the band is. There's literally two bands on the planet for me that sound like they could have come out of the Wild West, like not even country Western. Like country Western even sounds more modern than CCR in certain ways. They sound like they could be, and I've said this about the band as well, that they could have been out of the Civil War era. The band certainly sounds like a band that could have come from the 1800s. And somehow CCR feels that way to me as well. And that's another reason they feel so American, even just the way they dress and stuff. And then, the next modern era up, you could maybe go to the Eagles. But for some reason, the band and CCR literally almost seem to me like time travelers.
Even like the style of music of both bands. So, CCR, a West Coast band, at times they sound like they're from the South. At times they sound like they're from, with the bluesiness, like they're from the Chicago area. You could almost say at times they sound a little Canadian. Sometimes they got this East Coast vibe going on. So they're really kind of picking from all the spots here in this country, and they have this unique sound. And the band is very similar too. It's just, I guess you call it Americana, right? Is that what Americana really is? That has its feet and its hands in all these different musical flavors, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Okay, my next choice, a bit of an oddball choice, but I kind of thought of them right away. One of my favorite bands of all time, X, from Los Angeles. And here's another one of theirs. What I love about this band is they actually are also somewhat in the Bruce Springsteen camp. John Doe is such a treasured American singer-songwriter. They have a little rockabilly to them, definitely some country, definitely some punk. Los Angeles is a very American city. They're like almost the ambassadors of this kind of stuff from there. Look at what they look like, right? They look like 1950s throwback. You can't look more American than that, right? So just a lot of things about them. Again, just the whole historical thing. They really write about the experience of Los Angeles, living up there. And like I say, they're great students of rockabilly, country Western music. Gilkison here, Billy Zoom. What else do we got? There's Wild Gift. You know, you just look at the guys here. They've got this James Dean sort of look, you know, the rocker look, like I say, rockabilly look, country western look. They write a lot about being down and out and a hobo on the rails and all that stuff. You know, really, again, you know, many of the same sort of themes about how to fix things politically that a Bruce Springsteen or a John Mellencamp would talk about. So yeah, love X to death. And to me, they're just very, very inherently American.
I have never, ever heard anything by that band.
Oh yeah?
To my knowledge.
Yeah. They started out kind of punk. If you like a roots rock and new country and that whole Jason and the Scorchers thing, they're kind of a mix of all that with a really, really just gorgeous crooning country western voice in John Doe. And then they got it's a dual male female vocal band with Exene Cervenka. Very, very, like, some of the greatest lyrics you'll ever see. I mean, just even if you don't like the sound of them, read the lyrics and you'll have a blast.
There you go. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, my number 4 choice is probably actually my number 1. I have long claimed that this is probably no, maybe not. They've been one of my favorite American bands forever. I guess when you talk about just like American rock bands, they're probably number 1. I think I like an American prog band a little bit better overall, but the American band themselves, Grand Funk Railroad, Martin Popoff's favorite band on the planet. You know,
I own it all, and I just can't get into them. I don't know why.
So you're not like me, like with Magma. I owned it all and I got rid of it. I was like, you know what, this isn't happening. So because you never know, because Grand Funk one day you might all wake up one day, Martin, and say, you know what, I really get what Pete's been talking about all this time about Grand Funk.
Yeah.
I really dig these guys, and to me, this was, along with Creedence, this was probably like the first band that instantly came to mind. Not only were they on top of the world for a number of years, specifically here in the States, and of course, because this was a band that really didn't make much of an impact anywhere else, but here, selling out big stadiums and records selling a lot, and some hits, but they weren't a big hits band. But I think one of the reasons why I just had to pick them for this episode is I think lyrically, Grand Funk Railroad always were very in tune with the youth of America, and specifically at that time. So with the Vietnam War and all the political problems and soon to be Watergate and all that sort of stuff, I mean, the segregation and all that kind of stuff. I mean, Grand Funk really connected with the youth of the day and basically told them, we know how you feel, we're with you, so we're going to sing songs that basically, as if it was coming from the kids themselves, right? So there was a lot of anti-war stuff and anti-politics and all that sort of thing, and that to me showed a band that really kind of cared about what was going on, the pulse of the country, the pulse of the youth. They knew their audience, they knew it really well. And that's why, they waited till later on to do We're an American Band, which came out after they had already had all these great songs that really, I think, struck a chord with their audience. So, and they toured here relentlessly. I mean, they were, despite the fact that most of the critics hated them, they made it work for them. And a hardworking American band that, again, you look at them, 3 guys, eventually 4 from Michigan, right? Again, a very American city, and maybe not the most talented band in the world, as far as like musicality, but 2 really great singers, really good drum and bass combo. Mark Farner, actually a great front man with a really great voice, became a pretty damn good guitar player, I always thought. But and I picked E Pluribus Funk as perhaps my favorite album by them. I often struggle with what is actually my favorite Grand Funk album. It usually is up between 2 or 3 different albums, but lately it's been this one. So yeah, Grand Funk Railroad, I love them, and one of the great early heavy rock bands, I think, in the late 60s.
Yeah, and also, they're from the area that was pretty much, the city that built America, Detroit, Flint, right? I think they're officially from Flint, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but Detroit band, and they're also combining 2 great American traditions of that time: the hard rock that came out of Detroit and Motown that came out of Detroit, because they got the soulful thing going with them as well, right?
Yep.
So, and even as a media capital back then, you know, you could almost say that that Detroit was second to Los Angeles and New York was even next. But anyways, I mean, at one point with Detroit hopping the way it was as the place that was building, you know, the war effort and then cars and all that, of course, at the same time, you know, it was almost cooler than New York, certainly. As a media center, and maybe not as big and as complete as LA, but it's certainly, you know, one of the three American music capitals for you know 7 or 8 years there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. So, all right, my next one, I'm going up in intensity of Americanness. So I'm leaving my last two for last, which were absolutely my first choices. Next one, I'm going with Kiss. You know, New York band. You think of Gene Simmons and his capitalism and the great American story, the immigrant story, coming here and making it and realizing you know, you got to work hard, you got to stay sober. So, you know, he's the absolute, and he loves America. I mean, I still feel that guy should run for office at some point. You know, I remember seeing him on CNN about 10 years ago and thought, wow, he did a great job. You know, he did the metal community proud kind of thing, right? That was actually one of the best interviews I've ever seen with him, and he did a really good job. So I love that about him, but also, you know, New York band, and also they came to mind immediately. Because I thought of like those great iconic Kiss pictures when the bicentennial happened in 1976 with them, you know, Peter with the drum and the flag and stuff. Those are some of the greatest Kiss pictures of all time, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you think of them being big in Detroit and going to Detroit and the high school experience. And they're just quintessentially, you know, one of the great American bands, great ambassadors for the country. You know, and just again, one of these bands that just toured and just hit the Midwest. They're part of the big heartland of America in terms of that whole Midwest. Aerosmith's Blue Jean Army, sort of, you know, always in that cauldron in the Rust Belt, right? Playing all those places and all those, you know, sandwich gigs or headlining or third on the bill kind of thing. So yeah, Kiss, absolutely a great American band, and you know, holding up the team, holding up the side for New York City as well, which is you know, downtown the world, right? Downtown Earth, New York City, right? Yep. And so they are from you know, the most you know, the greatest city in the world, basically, right?
Yep.
There you go, Kiss.
And of course, you got Kissin' Time, you know, USA. I mean,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go put mine out of order because you talked about a New York band, and I'm going to talk about another New York band. I think, you know, most people would probably think Kiss first in this discussion over this band, but they are from New York. I love them, and you know, they have, you know, they've made a mark worldwide, I think. But you know, there's no doubt that this band really, you know, really gained all their momentum playing here and selling lots of records here in the States. Blue Oyster Cult.
Cool. Yeah.
You know, again, kind of maybe a strange choice for this because it's not like their lyrical content has anything to do with Americana or anything like that, but they are such a New York band. And like you said, New York is the greatest city. I mean, they're Long Islanders, right? We'll give them a little bit there. They are from Long Island. I lived in Long Island for a short period of time. That's an interesting place. But yeah, they are such a New York band, and I think that alongside, you know, bands like Kiss or the Ramones and a handful of other very New York acts, I think we've always kind of held them as one of our own, and just such a great group that I think probably were never true superstars like the Zeppelins, the Sabbaths, and the Stones and whatnot. But if we were ever to like kind of take a look at some of that kind of second tier hard rock bands from this era, would Blue Oyster Cult not be right at the top of that list or pretty close to it? I think so. So again, not a lot of great stories to tell about their Americana-isms, but I wanted to include them anyway because I just love them so much. So yeah, there you have it.
Well, they do have the big Ayatollah song, right? And they, you know, send them to hell and all that. And they've got all the World War II stuff going on.
Yeah, that is true.
And the Kennedy assassination. So there's a bunch of that. Biker gangs. and you say Long Island, well, those guys live downtown on and off as well a lot. And Alan and Patty were always part of the Saturday Night Live set. And what could be more American than Saturday Night Live
Yeah, that is true.
30, right?
That is true. Yep.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
And how many like kind of club dates did they play somewhat incognito for the people who didn't know any better? Soft White Underbelly's playing tomorrow night at CBGB's or wherever, and people who really don't follow this shit too much are probably like, I don't know who that is. I'll just go down and see, and boom, there's Blue Oyster Cult, right? They did that all the time, which was kind of neat. So. Again, taking advantage of the club system here in the States to do stuff like that is pretty genius, I think.
And Murray Krugman and Columbia wanted their own American Black Sabbath, right?
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. All right.
One of us could have picked Cactus. That would have been another.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go with which one of these is more American? I mean, I'm almost going blind looking at them. They're both so American, right? They're just blindingly the two most obvious choices one can imagine. But let's go with this one first. So ZZ Top. All right, there you go. America's. I consider them almost America's most beloved band. I mean, I've told the story. When I worked on kind of the storyline team and the writing team when Banger Films put together the little band from Texas, the ZZ Top documentary, and one of the storylines I was pushing to be the storyline, it turned out that the storyline of the movie is the big ramp up to Eliminator. In a way, that's kind of the big storyline. But I was pushing the storyline that this is the most American band in the world. The most American band that could ever be. And maybe that should be the actual theme of the movie, is just how American this band is. And there's always talk, up and down, rumors here and there, who's kind of like left wing in the band, who's right wing in the band, but they've always been very, very careful, even though they're obviously the big ambassadors for Texas, and they always say we'll never move away from Texas. And they had the big worldwide Texas tour, taking Texas to the people. What can be a more American state than Texas? Even with the colors, they had the star and the O and that. So they're big ambassadors that way, but they've always been very careful to not talk politics at all. One wonders if it would get them in trouble, and it's all kind of a canny thing to make sure that they're loved by everybody, and they are absolutely loved by everybody. But even the whole image with the long beards and the glasses and the cowboy hats and the nudie suits and the animals on stage with that big tour, and just kind of the whole Tex-Mex bar thing and the cars, right? The big the Eliminator car, just everything about them is just screams Americana. I don't think they're one of these bands that toured all over the world. They're definitely not one of these world bands, but yeah, everything about them, from the blues heritage, just in every single facet you can think of. This is a very, very, very American band. So there you go, ZZ Top.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great choice and could be the best choice, right? Who doesn't like ZZ Top, right? They're just the blues and rock and roll, and beards are pretty popular here in America, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good choice.
And there's a little bit of the idea, obviously there's when they started, they borrowed a lot from the British blues boom, but of course the British blues boom was just a brief blip. That it was already a boomerang from America's invention of rock and roll, right? Yeah. So I mean, everything about the ZZ sound is just the history of American rock and roll rolled into it, right?
And that big tour that they did, like in the 70s, I forget which one it was called, where they brought out the steers and the cows on stage.
Worldwide, yeah, worldwide.
I mean, it doesn't get more American than that, right?
Yeah.
You would never do that in Germany.
Yeah.
All right. How about a little band from the city by the bay, Journey? Again, perhaps kind of like a couple of the bands we've talked about, an American phenomenon. I mean, I think if I've talked to a lot of British people in my life, and there are certain bands that become really huge here that had not much of an impact over there, and they kind of puzzle what all the big, what all the commotion is all about, right? Let's be quite frank. Journey were an immense band here. They still are a pretty big band here, you know, for one of the old timers, and a ton of hit singles, a ton of album sales, and so American sounding, even though they have had, you know, one of their drummers was a British guy, right? Ansley Dunbar. But for the most part, this is, you know, a very American band. Two of the guys, original guys, came from another very American band in Santana. So there is that kind of pedigree, you know, one of the greats from the San Francisco music scene from the 60s. So, you know, there's just something about this band. You know, you go to a wedding here in the States, you're probably going to hear a Journey song. You go to a bar that has a jukebox, you're going to hear a Journey song. You go to a ball game, you're going to hear a Journey song. You turn on the radio, you're going to hear lots of Journey songs. It's like if you are in the US of A, from any time from like the late 70s through to today, you can't escape Journey. They're everywhere. And there was no way I was leaving them off of this list today. Even down to a lot of the songs, you know, it's just things that Americans understand, gravitate towards, and love.
And Don't Stop Believin', massive American anthem. Sopranos, right?
Yep.
So yeah.
Yep.
Okay, my last choice is about as American a band as ZZ Top. We've got Leonard Skynyrd, absolutely for most of the same reasons, and obviously the Southern rock thing too. You know, the South and all the music from there, and there's the history of American rock and roll in the South. This is the biggest Southern rock band of all time. They look about as American as you can imagine, you know, with the you know, the long beards and the cowboy hats and the sunglasses and the cowboy boots. And again, all the music is just so incredibly, you know, mixed up in the entire history of American rock and roll. And they always, you know, I mean, early on when it was sort of allowed, you know, they would have the Confederate flag, which is now replaced by the American flag. So they still, you know, across a lot of the album covers and stuff, you see stylized versions of the American flag kind of here and there and all over the place. But yeah, you know, I mean, I think these guys feel way more, you know, part of the pop culture fabric of America than the Allman Brothers, even, because the Allman Brothers are more of like an, you know, erudite, scholarly, jazzy sort of band, right? But this is just literally, you know, heartland rock and roll America. I mean, again, another band that I don't think did a lot of touring outside of the States. They certainly didn't come to Canada all that often either. There's a few of those that I have in kind of my honorable mentions where, you know, bands like REO and Kansas and stuff that didn't really come up even here very much. Right. So yeah, I don't know what more to say about Skynyrd, but you know, soon as you brought up this topic, those are the first two bands that came to mind that have to be at the top list, are Skynyrd and ZZ. Yeah.
And I would think Skynyrd even probably more so in recent years, and recent, I mean, the last 10 or 20 years, because they put out a lot of albums post like 1990, a lot of songs about America and this country.
Oh yeah.
As I think a lot of their earlier songs were very much rooted in what was going on down south. And then to kind of move away from that whole Confederate thing, I think they just started speaking from just America the Beautiful, you know, Red, White, and Blue, That Ain't My America. I mean, they had all these songs on more recent albums that were just about, you know, growing up and living in the US of A and the things you do and all that sort of thing, which probably not that uncommon with a lot of this kind of modern country crossover stuff that we do, right? It's not much different. And so I think they adapted a little bit more to move. It's like, yeah, we're from the South, but when it comes down to it, we're all just Americans, right? And we're going to sing about it a lot, which I know kind of rubs some of the long standing fans a little bit the wrong way. It's almost like it was a little too much, but you know, the guys in Skynyrd, it's like, well, that's what we believe in. It's what we're all about, right? So can't fault them for that.
And I neglected to mention Molly Hatchet as well. I mean, they'd be pretty high on this list too, right?
Yeah.
So hope that wasn't your last choice. But
no. My last choice was actually Kansas. So again, you know, this is a prog rock band, but very American. And it's actually funny because, you know, we're doing a show on in the prog scene coming up where we're strictly talking about some of our favorite American prog rock albums. And progressive rock is not really associated with the US of A.
Not at all.
Usually when you talk about prog, you're talking about the British bands and the Italian bands and the Canadian bands. But here in the States, I mean, we've had plenty of them, but not the type of band, it's US bands, prog bands don't usually come up in the conversations in the beginning, when you eventually get to them. However, this band is a different story. This is the most notable prog rock band from the US, and their music is very American, from the violin to the moments of symphonic rock, to the little bits of American boogie that are especially in some of their earlier works, to songs about the Native Indians, Native Americans, and about the American heartland, and especially, they wrote a lot of songs that had to do with things going on in Kansas, the surrounding states from where they were from. And it's almost like, you listen to Kansas and it just sounds like a bunch of really old-fashioned farmer boys who just grew up together. They play music and they sing about what they know, and that's okay. And I think that's the charm of their music. And later on, they started to get into all these fantasy, ideas and lyrics and things like that, which is, Kerry Livgren, that was the direction he was going into, and then some of the spiritual stuff and what have you. But such an American band, and really cool to have a band like this playing the stuff that the Brits perfected so well. Right. And doing it their way. So that was always going to be my number one choice there.
And the violin is closer, it's not at it, but it's closer to a fiddle tradition than a Paganini tradition, like a Austrian, classical music tradition. Right. Yep. And you mentioned the clothes. I mean, they look like a Southern rock band, basically. Totally. And, I can picture the overalls too. Right. And they're called Kansas. Long hair,
the beards. And...
yeah. They're called Kansas, of course, right?
Yep, they're called. Yep.
And I think that one album is a picture of John Brown, right? That dramatic, the big bearded dude, right?
The first album. Yep.
Yeah, is it the first album? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's John Brown. So, and again, I thought of them right away also because up here in Canada, they're just a band that never came here. They didn't come here very often.
Right. Same thing with the UK. Why. I've heard from so many UK people that Kansas almost never came here. They were nothing here. And everybody in the US talks about them. We don't know. We barely know who they are. So they basically, they spent their time here, and this is where they made their impact and made their money. And they're still, beloved here and all these years later.
Do you want to rattle off some honorable mentions? You got anybody in mind?
Who did I put down? Go ahead. Well, you can go first.
Well, you go first, because I've got a long list here. I'll just mention a few that you don't mention.
Okay, so I had also was considering the Allman Brothers. Okay. Again, maybe not as obvious a choice as Skynyrd, but I still think the Allman Brothers were very much a very American band, true and true. The roots to the whole Muscle Shoals, and as well as the Chicago, the scene, as well as just such a Florida band. They were just, everything about them just oozed the South. But they didn't. I'm not saying Skynyrd preached it, but the Allmans were like, okay, we are from the South, but we're basically at our core, we're just a blues and jazz band, right? We're just a bunch of guys who love to jam, so American sounding. I was going to mention, again, we want to go back up to the Midwest, specifically the Chicago area. Styx, another one that I was going to mention, and I wanted to throw the little band from Boston out there. Actually, there's two of them, Aerosmith and Boston. Both of them got to have Boston because they got the name, but Aerosmith probably is a little more deserving here, just basically for their longevity and their real attachment to the hard rocking youth of the 70s and the 80s, and then became a huge global phenomenon all those years later. So those were my honorables.
All right. Well, I had REO Speedwagon again, Midwest band, that whole Midwest rock thing, right? Springsteen, which we mentioned earlier. Van Halen, massive American experience with a GDP probably as big as America in certain years, right? Sammy Hager, just something about him just strikes me as the great American success story as well, just plugging away as a solo artist and all that time. And Ted Nugent, obviously, is one that you could mention. I mean, talk about a face of a certain kind of America over the years, more and more and more. And he's always flying the flag and the hunting and all that stuff, right? What else did I? Oh, just MC5 also. It just strikes me as, with their, kind of militant politics at the time, coming out of Detroit, the pot laws with their manager going to jail about pot and all that. And, a lot of their iconography has the American flag in it as well. So yeah, you could be a militant hippie New York hard rock, Detroit hard rock band, and also, be all wrapped up in the idea of what it means to be American. So yeah, those were mine.
And we both forgot the Grateful Dead. I think probably needs to be mentioned here as well. I mean, there's actually a lot of the bands from the San Francisco scene that, would find a good place in a discussion like this. Maybe the Jefferson Airplane as well.
Yeah, you think of how many times you saw, in that illustrated artwork and stuff, variations of the American flag, right?
Yeah. And here's an interesting choice too, specifically because he played the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock. But how about Jimi Hendrix? And when you really think about it, so Jimi Hendrix had to go to London to get noticed, right? Because that's where he got noticed. And that's where people started hearing about him here in the States from what he was doing over there. And then he comes back here and massive, right?
Plus he was in the Army, right?
Plus he was in the Army. Absolutely. Yeah. So, Hendrix absolutely needs to be part of this discussion. So there's a lot more we haven't even touched upon. Yeah. But I think we got some good ones here.
Excellent.
So for all of you watching, I guess in the comments below, and I'm sure we'll be seeing them in the chat, let us know what some of your favorite, real American bands are that kind of really, whether it be what they were singing about, where they toured, really are truly American bands, and tell us why. So put those in the comments below, and want to thank everybody for watching here tonight in this little kind of substitute show for the Hudson Valley Squares, since all the squares had off for the holiday today. Not me, of course, because I don't get any days off, and I decided Martin wasn't going to get a day off here either. So
yeah, right on.
So you got us on a Friday and a Monday, and you'll have us on Friday again. So Martin, anything you want to plug before we go?
Well, just wanted to say, I'm glad to do the live Q&A when you get that sorted out. If you still want to do that at some point, glad to be part of that, because that was kind of the plan. We were going to mix the two together, right? So yeah, but no, just writing away. I'm more in writing mode than anything. But martinpopoff.com for any of the books that are all in print.
Cool. Sounds good. Martin will be back on Friday morning, where we will be talking about some guilty pleasure bands. So again, these are bands that Martin and I both like, that probably would seem odd to some people, that don't really fit in with a lot of the other stuff that we normally listen to and talk about, but we really like them anyway. So, and
maybe there's an embarrassment factor, right? It's like, why am I listening to these guys so much, right?
Why do I listen to them? I listen to them, and I'm not going to tell anybody that I listen to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that'll be coming up Friday morning. So stay tuned for that, and a lot more here on the channel. Tomorrow we got In the Prog Seat. Wednesday is a new product review day. At least I hope so. I don't know if I really. Yeah, I got a couple of new things to talk about. Not a lot. Kind of a light week for that. Thursday is the Monsters Den. Then of course Martin will be back with me on Friday. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. We got new shirts on the merch page. So click on the link below. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't, and click on that notification bell. And that's it. See you all later on. Thanks for watching. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Good night, everybody.